Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode. We're excited to have Brian Newman. He's the founder of Subgenre. He consults on content strategy, distribution, and marketing for some of the top brands in the world. Brian has served as CEO of Tribeca Film Institute, produces independent films, and he writes a popular weekly newsletter. And he's currently based out in New York. Brian, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So right before we get started, we want to kind of kick it off with a couple of rapid fire questions where we want to just have an answer from the first thing that pops into your head.
Okay.
Currently, what is your favorite film?
Currently, what is my favorite film of all time or in the marketplace?
Of all time.
Okay. That's my go-to answer all the time with that one is Rules of the Game, John Renoir. It's a classic film student answer, but it's one of those films that sticks with me and that I try to revisit pretty often.
And what about your favorite TV show?
Oh gosh, I don't really have a favorite TV show, but right now I'm ensconced in the middle of the new season of Slow Horses, and that's been pretty fun to watch.
And if you could be a movie character or a TV show character, who would you want to be?
I have never thought of that one before. I guess, like all kids, I grew up being a big fan of Spider-Man, and that's what you'd always want to be.
And with big responsibilities.
Right.
And this one is for the more of the technical crew of people. What department in the film industry is your favorite outside of your own department?
I think that the line producer is my favorite and most important because I feel like they are really making sure things happen on the ground on especially fiction films. And it's not something I'm capable of doing. It's something I envy when someone's organized enough to be able to hold all that together.
Fantastic. So those were our quick questions to kind of just start to warm up today's interview. And
Sure.
we want to get started just by asking you, how did you get started in the film industry? Was it something that you knew from when you were really young, or did you stumble into it, or what was the journey like for you to get into this industry?
Yeah, I didn't actually think that I was going to go in the film industry for most of my life until college and university, and thought I was going to become I thought I wanted to be a neurosurgeon of all things, and quickly learned that I was not cut out for organic chemistry and some of the other courses you need to take to go to med school. And I always loved movies, and I took a film studies class, like film history theory. That's where I first learned of Rules of the Game that I mentioned before. And that was when I first realized that movies could be more than Spider-Man or Superman or the kind of movies that I always loved going to, and were also um, multiple different formats of art. And I really got intrigued with the history of film, with the different theories behind film as an art form. I had never seen things like avant-garde filmmaking, etc., and a lot of international cinema that you just didn't see as much where I grew up in the U.S. And so that's what I fell in love with film more broadly. And at first I thought I wanted to be a director like everyone when you first take a film class. But soon thereafter, I learned I was much more interested in other parts of the film industry that I didn't even know existed, but started to learn about.
And so after you took this introduction to film studies class, did you end up pursuing more courses, more classes, or even did you end up going to film school?
Yeah, I ended up switching into, at that time, my school didn't offer an actual film program, but I built an independent study program that essentially was a film studies program. There was also production classes and acting classes and directing classes. I had to piece together from different departments, but it essentially was film history and theory more than practice. And then I went to film school in graduate school, but again for film studies and film history, not film production. Um, so that became what was my main interest.
Right. And was there any key moments during the beginning of your career or key people that you met that really shaped your early career?
Yeah, I think that my undergraduate I was very lucky that I had several instructors who were filmmakers that had come from a long tradition of American avant-garde and experimental cinema, and who kind of opened my eyes to non-narrative filmmaking.
Hmm.
And I also was lucky enough to study with a theorist who was not really just about film, but about electronic media and where everything's going still to this day, named Greg Ulmer. And he wrote about a theory that he calls electracy, like the idea of going from morality to literacy to now what he calls electracy. It's a little clunky term, but the idea that we were literally shifting as a culture in a more phenomenal way than anyone understood. And it started with cinema, but also includes computers and artificial
Hmm.
intelligence now and virtual reality and how all these things converge. And that really influenced my thinking about why media is important and where it's going.
And where do you see now? Now that you've mentioned it, it's where do you see it going now? Where do you see film going? Where do you see branded content going with all this changes of this space of AI, virtual reality, different mediums and formats?
Yeah, I think
What's your
a
take?
lot of it is going towards a much bigger convergence of all of these things coming together where it's much more participatory, it's much more interactive, it's less top down, it's more creator centric, but more people are creators, and they have a lot more tools than ever before. I don't think cinema as cinema is going away. I'm not trying
Mhm.
to argue that whatsoever. I think that will still have its place, just like other forms of music still have their place and opera still has its place, all those things. But I think broadly speaking, it's just a lot more convergence. And that also includes, I work a lot in brands funding entertainment. I think that that'll be one piece of it, but not the only piece of it as well.
Mhm.
I just think there's a lot more overlap between all these mediums and a lot more opportunity. And so I'm excited by it, even though I think there's a lot of challenges and things to look out for. I think it's really exciting.
Right. So it's almost like there's this kind of gap or this window that, all these different formats are actually going to help each other rather than substitute one out of the industry. Because I don't think cinema is going anywhere anytime soon either.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that it'll change and there'll be different ways we approach it and whatnot. But it, at the end of the day, I'm still a believer that even as more people are, consuming short form content on TikTok and things like that, it's also leading them to discover cinema that they never knew of before.
For
And
sure.
as people are using these tools, they start to think of themselves not just as an audience member or a consumer, but also as a creator themselves. And so I think it will lead to an explosion in really interesting creativity across mediums, including cinema as well.
And so, just going back a moment to your early career, and once you finished your film studies programs, and that you built yourself, right at the beginning, you
At the
built that
beginning, I had
yourself.
to piece
Yeah,
together because they just didn't have that as a major.
yeah,
But then it was an actual cohesive program when I went to Emory University for film
right,
studies for grad
yeah.
school.
And once you got out of grad school, how did you jump into working in technical crew right away? Did you start working at a production company, or what was the stepping stones for you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, so while I was still in grad school, I was working as a producer on a friend's film, and I was a manager of the studio arts program at Emory, which gave me access to all of the equipment they had for different artist disciplines,
Hmm.
everything from sculpture to video editing machines, etc. And so I was making work, I was helping people with making their own work, but simultaneous to that, I got an internship at the Atlanta Film Festival. And the Atlanta Film Festival is a small but long running regional strong film festival in the
Hmm.
US. And I was interning with the programming department. And that quickly became a full time job, actually, because of some weird circumstances that happened. The the lead festival director, got in a wreck. He's actually okay to this day, but it was
Yeah.
temporarily, in the hospital. My boss got promoted, and all of a sudden I was still in grad school and found myself as the lead programmer of the film festival overnight while I
Yeah.
was still a grad student. And so that kind of shifted my career into film festivals and nonprofit film organizations supporting filmmakers. And we can talk about the twists and turns of that, but that really shifted my thinking into realizing that what I really enjoyed was connecting films to audiences
Hmm.
as much as making films. And so I really shifted for many, many years. And to this day, it's still a big piece of what I do, but a lot
Hmm.
of it shifted into programming and connecting filmmakers and audiences together.
Right. And just before we jump into those twists and turns that you just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a very important question that I ask to a lot of our guests that have gone to film school or have not gone to film school. But what are the pros and cons for you about film school? Do you think it is a necessary gate into the industry? Do you think you can do it without film school? Because there's this whole debate about
Yeah.
film school and no film school. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I vacillate on it a fair bit. And I think when I was debating where to go for graduate school, I was debating between a traditional MFA production and
Hmm.
a Master of Arts, which was more history and theory. And when I started looking into it, I realized that in the heyday, glory days of US film schools, everyone thinks of NYU with Scorsese back in the day. But I started digging into that and realized back then they were really studying film history and theory, and they had literally one camera in the basement, one Steenbeck for editing in the basement, and it was much less technically focused. It was really much more history and theory focused. And so that's why I decided to go more that route, was I thought that to become a good filmmaker, you really needed to understand film and watch a ton of films and really think through the history and theory of filmmaking as much as learning the technical aspects. And so I think that's the most valuable thing. And that's something you can do on your own or through school. And the tech you can learn, you know, anyone can pick up their phone now and has the tech they need, but you can
Yeah.
learn in other ways. But over time, one thing has stuck with me, which is some of the more successful filmmakers I know today, internationally even, they met their colleagues in the film business through film school. And some of them still work together as producers, director, editor, cinematographer to this day, every film they do, and they met each other at film school. And so I think that's really where you build if you're lucky, you build your core network that helps you through your career. And so I think if you can afford it and, um, and it's of interest to you, it can be really valuable in getting your career started. But it's not the only way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a recurring theme that I see from a lot of answers is the one of the network. The answer of the
Yeah,
network that you get out of film school is one that is a big pro in this whole debate. And I can definitely relate to the because I did do a year and a half of film school out here in Barcelona, and it was very much technically based, and
hmm,
there was something that it didn't resonate much with me because I could the tech keeps advancing at such a fast pace, and it's something that I can learn on my own, and the only way that you learn is hands on, really. But
right,
we weren't really getting subjected as much as I think I would have liked to have from the theory, the history, because ultimately I think for me my best film school that I had was when I was living in Amsterdam and I had a cinema pass and I could go unlimited times to the cinema and I would go there with my
hmm,
little notebook and just sit in the cinema and watch, you know, I would be watching films, going to the cinema 5-7 times a week with
yeah,
my notebook, and that's I think I still think that those were the 2-3 best years in terms of how I started viewing films and then
right.
how I incorporated that into my own career. And you hear a lot of other filmmakers that are established saying, "Watch films. This is the best film school."
Yeah.
Ultimately, watch as many films as you can. Um,
Yeah, I think you got to
is there
watch a
one
ton of
film?
films, read a lot
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
um,
Read a lot of
and
scripts. Yeah.
yeah, and that that's the best film school, but the connections and, you know, arguably at a good film school, they also give you a little bit of a leg up on some of the tech side as well. But I've seen the best connections from it, just the network effects being the most important part.
Yeah. And now to jump back into the twists and turns from how you've developed from working on Friends Productions, being this managing position, to then going into more distribution and choosing films for audiences. I know you were the CEO of the Tribeca Film
Mm-hmm.
Institute. How did you get to that position, or what led you to and what experiences did you get out of being the CEO of the Tribeca Film Institute?
Yeah, so I was working my way up in through different film festivals and whatnot, and ended up running an organization that gave the Rockefeller Fellowships, which were funds provided by the Rockefeller Foundation to fund
Hmm.
media artists, not just filmmakers, but also new media artists as well. The program started when they gave the first grant ever to Namjoon Pike for his video artwork. And so it was always focused on a broad spectrum of media artists. And we also did a lot of work around nonprofit solutions for the problems around distribution of films.
Yeah.
And I decided that we could have bigger impact by merging with the nonprofit organization that was attached to the Tribeca Film Festival, and approached them about doing a merger where we didn't get rid of anyone. It was about two groups coming together to build something bigger. And so
Hmm.
we merged the organizations, and I became CEO of the Tribeca Film Institute. And the goal was really to build out a somewhat equivalent of the Sundance Institute, but on the East Coast and
Hmm.
based in New York, that had a mixture of everything from filmmaker training, emerging filmmaker programs, grants for filmmakers, as well as um, conversations and workshops and all those things, coupled with a film festival that could bring all those
Hmm.
things together. So all the activities that we did year round at the Institute would always kind of culminate with special programs during the film festival as well. And it was it was great. I enjoyed doing it, and it was a high profile position just because of the nature of being in New York, and the fact that Robert De Niro and Jane Rosenthal founded it, and so
Yeah.
it's very high profile in New York, and that was great. But um, it's at some point I decided that I wanted to move out on my own to do different things, but it established a great network for me that I use to this day. And going
Right.
back to that network idea, you know, when you're giving grants to filmmakers, they will tell you a lot of things they won't tell other people if it's the truth behind the story. And
Yeah.
so I learned a lot about what their pain points were in terms of getting other financing, getting distribution. And that kind of got me even more interested in those areas. And at the same time, I got to know a lot of those filmmakers through the festival and through the grant programs and training programs really well. And today, when I'm looking for filmmakers to work on a new project for a brand, or I'm thinking of whose projects to produce, it's all from people I met during those days.
Yeah. And if you had to look back at your career as in this position at the Tribeca Film Institute, was there something a vision that you had, or a key point that you changed in the institute that you feel like you've left behind a legacy, or something that you're proud of that you incorporated into that the Tribeca Film Institute?
Yeah, the biggest thing we did at that time was a program called Reframe, where we digitized thousands of films that were stuck on the shelf in analog formats, everything from 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter to VHS tape, and that weren't available to the public. And with a big emphasis on American avant-garde and experimental film, as well as documentary formats that had not seen the light of day for years. And we digitized those and made them available through a special website. Filmmakers kept their rights, and all of those films were also made available for sale through Amazon and Amazon Prime and all those things. And to this
Fascinating.
day, those films are still out there. The during COVID, I had already left Tribeca back in
Hmm.
2009 or 10. During COVID, the Institute actually shut down, and now the festival still exists, but the Institute
Hmm.
does not. But that program, its legacy still lives on because those films are still in circulation and they wouldn't have been before.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
a great way of preserving films and bringing them, into the modern age. And
Yep.
um, once you left, because you mentioned that you after Tribeca, you wanted to start kind of do your own thing and see different things. Is this when subgenre started?
Almost. What happened was I actually left thinking that I was starting a startup, and I was partnered with a film producer who's pretty well known named Ted Hope. He went on to run Amazon Studios for a while, and he's produced hundreds of independent films in the U.S. and internationally. And he and I had an idea for a startup before Letterboxd existed. It was called Flicklist,
Mm.
and it
Flickr.
was kind of Flicklist at the time was supposed to be different but similar to Letterboxd in that it would help you find and connect with the best films based on recommendations from people you trust.
Yeah.
And we failed miserably. And I learned a quick lesson, which was two non-technical people should not be co-founders of a startup. You need at least one person who can stay up all night and at their workshop and code all night long and fix something that's broken. And when we had tech problems and we went through different tech people, it wasn't us. And so
Yeah.
I couldn't solve those problems and the startup for multiple reasons failed. We learned a lot about it. And simultaneous to that happening, um, a friend of mine had become chief marketing officer at Patagonia. And she called me up and said, "Hey, I know you've done a lot of work with distribution. We're making a movie. We need help figuring out how to distribute it. Can you help us?" And I helped
Yeah.
them launch that film and launch Subgenre as a consulting company for distribution. At the time, I didn't even know I'd specify down to brands, but very quickly it became
Yeah.
a company working with brands on distribution and marketing. And
So if there's
now
somebody
that's all I do.
listening, and if there's somebody listen, if an audience member is listening to this, how would you describe subgenre? What does subgenre do as a company exactly?
Yeah, it's now currently focused on helping major brands move into the film and entertainment space, mostly film, but some of the people we work with are also doing episodic series and television
Mhm.
as well. And a few are doing things like podcasts and short form social video, etc. But predominantly, we help them figure out what they should be doing in the film world and who they
Mhm.
should work with, and then we help distribute and market those films globally. Um, we don't ever make the movies for the brand, so I connect
Right.
them to a producer and or director that are the best talent within the scope of the type of project they want to make, the region they're wanting to do it in. We connect them globally to producers, and then we help them sell their films to Netflix or Apple or Amazon or different platforms throughout the world. And we also implement their theatrical campaigns, their marketing campaigns. It's a small company of right now about 8 employees, and we bring on a lot of freelancers, and we work with about 20 different brands right now on that.
And do you guys jump into a project in the pre-production, post-production, or kind of just at any stage, depending on the needs of the project?
Yeah, it's any stage, and we take people before they've even started developing a project. They're just at the idea stage or figuring out what they even
Mhm.
want to do, what's the right lane for them to be in. And then we also work with projects that have completed and they need help figuring out their festival strategy and how to go to market. The best
Mhm.
case scenario, we start as early as possible, but we're able to work with people at any stage.
Interesting. And you talked about a couple, when you guys started Flicklist as well, that there was a big failure there, and that there was a lot of life lessons learned. What would be one of these important life lessons or lessons that you took from that, and that you kind of incorporate into your day to day practice, or your into subgenre now?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things. One is to really vet your partners on any project you work with and only work with people that you really trust. And it's a long story I won't go into here, but we didn't do that with some of the tech co-founders of the
Hmm.
company that we worked with, and that's why it's part of the reason it didn't work. Although I shoulder all that blame because, again, if I had known how to code myself, we could have solved that
Yeah.
problem. The other thing I think is that sometimes you can be too early with an idea, and what you need to do is be on the leading edge, but not the extreme leading edge, because sometimes that can be too soon for audiences or for a company. So we try to meet people where they are, not where we hope they'll be in 10
Hmm.
years.
Interesting, interesting. And I just wanted to go back to a little and touch a little bit on your production experience as well, because we've kind of talked a little bit
Yeah.
about subgenre, your work there. You've worked on a couple of films, including The Outside Story and Short Up. How do you select a project, and for your is there criteria for you before jumping on a project that that have personal requirements to have?
Yeah, I have to feel like one, that it's someone I know, the director in particular is someone I know and I like their vision. I believe in artists and auteurs, and I think it's a team effort, but believe in the artist's vision, and I feel like it's got to be someone that I align with their vision, and I think I can help them bring it to life. If I don't
Hmm.
think that I'm going to be able to bring something different than someone else, it doesn't make sense for me to be involved in it. And some of those have been documentary films, some have been fiction narrative films. Outside Story was a fiction narrative film, and I have a new film premiering at the Woodstock Film Festival in 2 weeks called If You See Something. That's a narrative semi-fiction story based on some true stories
Hmm.
about the Iraqi American experience in the U.S. post September 11th. Um, but again, that was something where I felt like I could bring something extra to the table to help that film get made and bring
Hmm.
it to the public. I'm doing less of them right now, to be honest, because I've focused so much of my business on the brand side. And there, I only work with brands that I trust as well. And I only work with ones that I think are making quality films. They're not product placement. They're not about selling a product. They're usually values aligned. And again, it's making sure my values are aligned with theirs and I can help them bridge a gap and make it
Yeah.
happen and get to an audience.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but would you say that um, before you jump into the script or the story, you need to align with the creator, the director, or whoever is involved in the project at a more personal level to know that they're capable of telling the story, or that you feel that there's an alignment between you guys before you guys get into the story?
Yeah, I mean, usually it's kind of simultaneous to the
Right.
basics of the story,
Yeah.
but that we're aligned in principle, but also that they understand that I'm not there just to help them realize their vision. I'm there to help them make the best movie possible. And so we might have
Mhm.
disagreements, but therefore making the movie even better,
Yeah.
and that it's in the service of that.
Yeah, and that's actually a very interesting little side note that you mentioned about disagreements. How do you handle disagreements with your director or with another creative in on the project? How do you balance that? Or
Yeah, it doesn't always work, to be honest, but in the best case scenario, you're able to refocus on what's going to make the strongest film
yeah,
and what's what's in service of the strongest film. And usually if you can back up and make sure you're both aligned on that vision, then that's the most helpful thing.
yeah. And before we wrap up, I would like to ask you, like, what is some advice that you would give somebody that is starting out in the film industry or looking into branded content or consultancy or distribution? What are kind of like your tidbits or hints that would help somebody get a leg up starting out right now?
Yeah, I think that there's several things. One is, as you were mentioning before, watch a lot of movies, watch a lot of, and these days it's watch. I hate the word content, but broadly speaking, a lot of different things, not just traditional films.
Yeah.
They all inform your artistic process. I think it's also being nice to everyone and networking with everyone, because that
Yeah.
volunteer might suddenly become the festival programmer the next day and
Yeah.
help your career. And I think it's also about trying to build a sustainable career. So to do that, you need kind of multiple legs of the stool. And I think it's really good to be well versed in multiple different aspects of the industry so that
Yeah.
you can build a sustainable career. And
What would you define sustainable career in the film industry?
yeah, I think everyone has to define that for themselves. But for
Yeah.
me, it's being able to consistently create the work that you want to make and make a living from it. And it's different in every country today, and depending on the levels of state support or not. But in the
Hmm.
U.S., where I live in particular, the industry is very independent, and there's not a lot of support for it. And it's
Hmm.
very difficult to make a living just as a filmmaker alone, unless you're also open to doing things like making films with brands or doing advertisements
Yeah.
or having some other aspect that brings in funds to your career. And
Yeah.
so to me, being as well rounded and kind of thinking broadly about your career and how that can be will make you more successful.
Yeah. And it sounds like your career has evolved a lot throughout the years, and you've tried different sectors in the industry itself. Is there something that's next for you in your career besides subgenre, or are you going to be focused on subgenre for the time being?
Yeah, I had a mentor who told me you should be changing what you do every 5 years. And so that's been one of my guiding principles. And then I realized that in some senses, I've gone past that term expiration for subgenre. But right
Hmm.
now, the company keeps growing and we're doing exciting new things. And every day we do something new and different. So I'm enjoying that, but I'm definitely pretty sure that within a couple years, I'll get distracted by something else that I think could be interesting for the field and go in some new direction.
Yeah.
Hopefully, subgenre will live on with other people running it, but I might be thinking of something new.
And kind of piggying off that answer, this is a question that I find very interesting to ask as well to someone like yourself that has so much experience in the industry. Is there something that you're currently actively learning about, or some new skill that you're doing now that maybe has nothing to do with the film industry, or it does? Um,
Yeah, I think right now, like everyone, I'm really digging into how AI is shaping culture, not just film. And I think that it's really trendy, of course, but it's something that's been coming along for a long time.
yeah.
And so I'm I'm not like super active in it, but it's the one area I'm reading a lot about. I'm studying a lot. I'm talking to people who work in the sector and trying to
Hmm.
learn a lot more about it, because I think it is going to be so important to the next iteration of whatever we do in this space. And
Right.
so a friend of mine got a job at one of the leading AI companies in the world, and he's a filmmaker and got a job there. And I told him, we constantly talk. And I was like, this is the only area I would consider jumping into for something next, but I
Hmm.
haven't found what that would be. And I'm also trying to figure out, is there ways it can impact the stuff I do? I'm not using it now for anything
Yeah.
really, but it's something I'm studying a lot.
It's something that you're keeping an eye out, something that that you're staying ahead of the curve with the curve as it progresses. So, which is
Probably
something
with
I
it,
think
not ahead of
with it,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
With it for sure. And
Yeah.
just we're gonna jump to a question from our Instagram to wrap it up. And
Sure.
we have a question here that says, "How do you stay creative and motivated?"
For me, that's actually something that's kind of completely different than my day to day stuff. For me, every day I have to do something to completely kind of get my mind off of everything I'm doing. And for me, that's either swimming or running, and and usually swimming. And it kind of empties my mind. And it's not really meditation, but it's very meditative. and
Hmm.
it lets my mind just float into other things and think of new possibilities. And so I think that's the main thing. The second thing is just being open to all new ideas. So I have a lot of friends that anytime you mention AI, they just shut down. They're like, "We hate this. We don't want anything to do with
Hmm.
this." And to me, it's like not everything is bad. Let's figure out all the good of these new
Yeah.
things and let's have fun with it. Like that's the idea is like, how can we keep having fun with these things? And that keeps you
Yeah, for
creative.
sure. And by keeping an open mind, you're also open to new opportunities that you might not have seen besides. Because if you shut yourself off, you're definitely not going to be seeing
Right.
these different opportunities that come your way. Um,
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Brian, thank you so much for sharing your stories, answering our questions today. Is there
Sure.
anything that you would like to add before we sign off for today, or anything that you want to that you got going on, or that you want to say? Because, like, for example, you have your film coming out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping that people see if you see something as it starts to come out to the public. We're just starting to hit the film festival circuit. But the main thing I would say is, I just spent 30 minutes with you giving all my ideas of how you should think about your career. Probably half of them are wrong. You should ask tons of other people, like question everything, talk to tons
Yeah,
of people, get lots of advice because that's how you'll piece together the right answers.
right. And everybody will take their own little tidbits, and you have to
Right.
kind of puzzle your own career with all the advice that you get.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us
Thank
today.
you.
It was been a wonderful conversation, and I'm excited to see what's next for you. Whether you continue with subgenre, jump into the AI space, and even be in producing new films. Thank you
Right.
again so much.
Thank you.